Maria Potts now. Nina, thank you for joining us. The issue of homeland migrant security in the U.S. seems to be taking center stage.
That's right. On the one hand, you have the call mainly from the right for Americans to take up arms against the terrorists. And then on the other hand, for migrants to protect themselves against this backlash against Muslims. And one example of the call for Americans to take up arms, a sheriff in upstate New York appealed on Facebook for all those in his district who have licensed weapons to exercise their right to use them. In Texas, where there's been a backlash against the arrival of Syrian refugees, where the state of Texas actually tried to sue the federal government over the resettlement of Syrian refugees. In Austin, in Texas this weekend, there will be an open carry rally with the main mission being that gun-free zones, they say, are killing Americans. This idea that had the victims in the San Bernardino attack been carrying weapons, that they might not have died. And likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, an effort among migrants to protect themselves against this backlash. In Tampa in Florida this weekend, a local mosque is holding active shooter training so that its congregants can feel more protected should there be an attack against the mosque. So that gives you a flavor, I think, of the atmosphere right here now in the United States.
Yes, and yet one would have thought that climate change and job creation would be at the top of the agenda for the candidates seeking election.
You think, and as Kate mentioned in that report just now, come December, that may change, that the economy will be back on the agenda. I'm not sure that climate change ever was to quite the degree that the international community might hope. It's worth saying that the Paris attacks, as you mentioned, and the attacks in San Bernardino, the terror attacks, really changed the tenor of the debate. But more importantly, perhaps Donald Trump, the front runner on the Republican side, on the Republican playing field, his anti-Muslim rhetoric has really hijacked the debate, but it's also created a very deep dilemma, I think, for the Republican Party. Republicans are worried that his rhetoric could lose them the next election, but I think they're not very sure what that means. I don't think they're very confident, the Republican leadership, that they could win the next election without Trump's supporters either.
That's right. Polls are showing Donald Trump as leading amongst the Republican candidates. But after this inflammatory outburst of his, critics are saying that this may have no bearing at all in the final outcome.
I think that's right. I mean, there's a great debate. If you look at the last three presidential cycles, it's true that the presidential race is a long road. None of those in the past who were leading the polls, if you look at those last three elections, none of those leading in the polls this far ahead actually went on to win the party's nomination. That said, Donald Trump has been leading the Republican polls since about mid-July uninterrupted. And the latest CBS poll has him at 35% among Republican primary voters, up 13 points since October. And even Ted Cruz, who is his closest perhaps rival, is trailing behind at 16%. So, I mean, it is to play for.
Now, Donald Trump's Muslim comments would have seen his figures dropping, but why is the opposite happening?
I think Americans are feeling very afraid, and the attack in San Bernardino was the first. I think it's worth remembering the first attack since the attack on home soil, 9/11. So I think Americans are feeling extremely cautious. I mean, it's interesting to look, I think, on the Democratic side, what is happening on that playing field. Hillary Clinton, I think, is still leading, obviously, for Democrats, but Donald Trump is posing an even more significant threat. She's got two distinct challenges right now: how to differentiate her her campaign from President Obama's presidency, and that makes things very awkward for her, not least because she has to be a lot more specific about her campaign pledges, but she's also got to try and assert herself as a commander-in-chief. Everything that she has accused Donald Trump of not being an effective commander-in-chief, lacking in foreign policy experience, lacking in national security experience, she has to prove to Americans now that she is capable of sharing the same worldview as them, and that her foreign policy stance really chimes with the mood of America right now.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that update. That was our U.S. correspondent, Nina Maria Potts.